Hello and welcome to another fun-filled edition of Adam's Music Box, where today I want to talk about the many sides of Dion. Because Dion is one of the most versatile performers, singers, musicians that we've seen over the last 50 years. And it's been a long career. He's still going strong, and there's really something for everything in the music. He started off in the late 50s, and he was really part of that golden era of rock and roll music, the kind of music that was fun before it got a bit too serious and a bit too downtrodden. I mean, music does move with the times, but it was really sort of riding that wave of sort of youthful optimism of the late 50s and early 1960s, which with songs like Run Around Sue, which was a huge hit, and The Wanderer, which is an absolute huge hit, which was the first song I ever sang karaoke to as a kid. So that is a fun bit of trivia for me, if that ever comes up on your Wheels of Fortune and Jeopardies or any of the rest of it. He initially had success with the Belmonts, his backing group, but by 61, he was definitely flying free and releasing albums under his own name, Dion, that's Dion DiMucci to his mother. And he continued to have so much success with both singles and with LPs throughout the 1960s, just releasing things one after the other. But then something changed, and it was sort of the first of many interesting changes in Dion's musical career. His self-titled album from 1968 was very different than any of the LPs that he released before. It was more folky and less rocky. It was more contemplative, more philosophical, and really for the first time in a big way, there was social commentary. And when he decided to shift into this lane, he did so really, really wonderfully convincingly, because he ended up writing what is quite possibly the most important political, sociological, call it what you will, song of the late 1960s. And this was the hit Abraham, Martin, and John. If you don't know it by name, you will have heard it. It's been in movies, TV shows, it's been everywhere. And the reason that it endures so much is that it really captured the zeitgeist of the late 60s, which is interesting because while the early Dion stuff was sort of the soundtrack to the late 50s, early 60s, a more optimistic time, by the time you're in 68, you've got the Vietnam War, you've got an unpopular president, you've got so many political assassinations, and that's what the song is about. It's not easy to pull off a song about such a heavy subject, but Dion was able to do so. Abraham, of course, refers to Abraham Lincoln, Martin refers to Martin Luther King Jr., and John refers to John Kennedy, and of course, his old friend Bobby, meaning Robert Kennedy, was also mentioned in the song as one of the victims of the horrible assassinations that marred an otherwise really interesting decade. But when it comes to Dion, that wasn't the end of the shifts, because in the 70s, he continued to produce really high quality records in what was a contemporary style. And one of the ones that really stands out from that era, it's a controversial one. It's 1975's Born to Be With You. And it's controversial because it was produced by Phil Spector. We didn't know, well, we always knew he was nuts, but it was controversial because of the sound. Phil Spector's wall of sound is something that sort of divides people. It always sort of did, but by the time you get into the late 60s and 70s, it sort of divides people rather a lot, because in the early 60s it worked because most people were listening on AM radio or monophonic jukeboxes. But by the late 60s and 70s, everyone's got a high fidelity stereo system. FM radio is what all the kids are listening to. And you could make an argument that Spector's production never really moved into the stereophonic age. But I think that there's still a lot to be said for it. And the album itself, Born to Be With You, is a really interesting one. And then you can sort of contrast that with Streetheart, the follow-up album, which has a much more, inoffensive production style. Another side of Dion came in the early 80s when he started producing a lot of Christian pop music. There was the album Only Jesus in 1981, I Put Away My Idols in 83, and these albums achieved quite a lot of success in what was then the growing sector of specifically contemporary Christian music. he yet again had a rebirth in the 90s when there was sort of yet another revived interest in the early era of rock and roll. But what he's done in sort of more recent decades is go into the blues. And he has achieved a lot of fame, both on record and in the clubs, touring, playing the sort of the standard music of the blues repertoire. Who's to say what's next? But if you were to just take the average man on the street, have him listen to Run Around Sue and then Abraham Martin and John, they would say, this cannot be the same guy. But it is, which shows you that if you've got talent and are willing to take chances, you can produce a lot of different kinds of music that is very high quality. Like, subscribe, and we'll see you next time. Take care.